So far, we've covered several ancient cities in both the Near East and various parts of Europe. But in this program, I'd like to take a look at one in a totally different part of the world, specifically in Mexico, or Mexico. For there, located almost in the center of the country, just northeast of the capital, Mexico City, are the ruins of Teotihuacán. Teotihuacán is not just any Mesoamerican city. It may have possibly been the largest of all cities in the pre-Columbian Americas, though some claim that the nearby Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan might have surpassed it in population just before the arrival of the Spanish. It's actually from the Aztecs that we get the name of the site, Teotihuacán, meaning birthplace of the gods. By the time that the Aztecs controlled the area, the city had already been abandoned for centuries. What its original inhabitants, who we'll call Teotihuacanos, called it is unknown, since any inscriptions stating its original name have as of now not been found. Unlike many other ancient cities that just happen to have sprung up, Teotihuacán seems to have been deliberately planned, which eventually allowed it to become the cosmopolitan, commercial, religious, and probably political hub of ancient Mesoamerica, at least for a time. The first settlement on the site of Teotihuacán is believed to have been established in the 1st century BC. However, the population of the town grew rapidly during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, and probably reached its zenith between the years 4 to 500, due mostly to the inhabitants of many nearby, smaller settlements immigrating to the city. During this time, Teotihuacán may have covered over 20 square kilometers and contained between 100,000 to 200,000 people. Believed to have been the center of one of the earliest states in Mesoamerica, the city grew in one of the small, fertile valleys in central Mexico that was close to major sources of obsidian. It also happened to be along the local trade routes that connected the interior to the Gulf Coast. The city was laid out on a grid centered around 2 major, broad streets that were several kilometers in length. One ran east to west, while the other north to south. They crossed in the center of the city, dividing the metropolis into 4 quarters, which probably had some sort of religious significance, since in ancient Mesoamerican cosmology, both the Earth and the cosmos were divided into 4 quarters. The citizens of Teotihuacán lived in apartment compounds that were comprised of several rooms surrounding courtyards. These apartments, of which at least 2,000 have been uncovered, varied in size and opulence. For example, those that archaeologists have determined to have likely belonged to upper-class individuals and their families were often quite spacious and contained elegant carvings and mural paintings, while those belonging to the lower classes were much smaller in size and without much decoration. The differences in size and quality of housing indicates a good deal of social stratification within Teotihuacano society. And, like many modern, diverse cities of today, there were separate neighborhoods where people of similar ethnic and cultural communities resided. For example, one neighborhood contained homes belonging primarily to residents from the area around Oaxaca, while others came from the Mayan regions of the Gulf Coast. The main street, or rather boulevard, of Teotihuacán was called by the Aztecs the Street of the Dead. It runs north to south from an area known as the Ciudadela to the great temple that we today call the Pyramid of the Moon. Though its actual function isn't known, the Ciudadela is believed to have been a sacred or royal precinct that was restricted by several stone-covered terraces. Inside the Ciudadela were several buildings, including temples and apartment complexes that are believed to have belonged to the city's ruling class or perhaps even a royal family. Several mass graves have also been found of people who archaeologists believe may have been sacrificial victims. If one were to leave the Ciudadela and journey north along the Street of the Dead, they'd pass by the ruins of several temples, the most prominent being the Temple of the Sun, which is the second largest pyramid in all of Mesoamerica. Its square base measures 225 meters on each side, and it rises about 65 meters towards the heavens. In those days, it was probably taller because it would have had additional wooden buildings on its top. Towards the northern end of the Street of the Dead is the Pyramid of the Moon, which is the second largest building in Teotihuacán. Excavations here have uncovered a burial site beneath the complex that might have belonged to one of Teotihuacán's rulers. It's hard to say whether or not such an individual was a king because scholars still don't know what type of government Teotihuacán really had. Unlike earlier Olmec or later Mayan sites, Teotihuacán doesn't have the massive palaces, gigantic funerary pyramids, statues, inscriptions, and other monuments that were generally commissioned by or dedicated to kings. Though having many beautiful murals and plenty of artwork, these are seemingly strictly religious. Nothing can be conclusively identified as belonging specifically to a king. Perhaps the government, instead of being controlled by a single king or family, was presided over by a small group of co-regents. Others contend that the rich burials found in places such as the Temple of the Moon indicate that in fact there was some sort of monarchy here. However, those buried there could also have been other people of importance, such as a great warrior or a holy person, and not necessarily a king. Given its size and sophistication, something not seen in other sites from the early 1st to 5th centuries, Teotihuacán was likely the capital of some large state or empire. However, the extent of this state is unknown. There's a good deal of evidence, though, that Teotihuacán was connected culturally and commercially to other areas of Mexico and even Guatemala. But whether or not it actually had political authority over these areas is another matter. Though we know that the people of Teotihuacán were great city planners, builders, artists, and must have also been quite religious, we know very little about them personally. For example, what language did they speak? How exactly were they governed? And what led them to create the largest city, at least in the Americas, of their day? And of course, what was the real reason that the city was eventually abandoned? Archaeologists have found evidence that around the year 750, the central part of the city was burned. But why is still a mystery. Was it due to a war, a rebellion, or simply an accident? What is known is that shortly after this event, most of the population left for elsewhere. While the Aztecs may have believed that the gods had been born in Teotihuacán, it seems that by the 8th century, they, along with most of the human population, had already left the city behind. There are many questions about Teotihuacán that have yet to be answered, and the site is still being excavated to this day. I hope that in the near future, I'll be able to do another program for you all with updates on this truly remarkable place. As always, thanks so much for stopping by, I really appreciate it. I'd also really like to thank GrandKeg69, Yap de Graaf, Pasta Frola, Michael Lewis, Danielle Allen, Danny Vaneca, YNXTV, Robert Morgan, Cher Cam, Farhad Kama, and all of the channel's patrons on Patreon for helping to support this and all future content. Check out the benefits to being a Patreon member, and if you'd like to join, feel free to click the link in the video description. You can also follow History with Sai on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as continue to listen to special audio programs on the History with Sai podcast. Thanks again, and stay safe.